Week number 4 of our reading in Philemon. I hope that means that you have been through the book lots and lots and lots of times. Someone said we really shouldn't call it a letter, we should call it a postcard, because it is very brief compared to some of the other letters, which means we don't have this rich application section like we do on the back half of Ephesians or Colossians.
Yeah, it's short.
Or one of those letters. However,
we have a couple of phrases is what we have.
I do think that Philemon is rich with applications. One of the things that really impresses me about the letter, and we talked about this when we began, is that Paul never tells him what to do.
No, he strongly hints.
That's interesting.
He strongly hints.
But he never says,
you must do this.
Free him.
Yeah.
And I get the sense that's where he's going. But he doesn't tell him to, he doesn't just come out and say, you owe me, and I'm saying, I want you to free him. So why doesn't he just say that?
Well, I mean, for my part, I think both with what he says in verses 8 and 9 and what he says in verse 14, this whole, I could command you, but for love's sake, I prefer to appeal to you. I prefer to do nothing without your consent in order that your goodness may not be according to compulsion, but of your own accord. Paul recognizes that one of the final stages of bringing somebody to maturity is encouraging them to reason rightly for themselves rather than forcing them. So in other words, think about that and how we raise our kids. My 3 or 4-year-old who's still immature, I tell them what to do. I expect them to bend to my authority. Do the right thing because I told you so. My older teenager, sometimes I say, you know what we believe in this house. I'm not going to make a decision for you. I just know you'll do the right thing. Right? And that seems to be like...
You mean you give them a guilt trip?
Well, yeah. You gotta listen to what Paul's saying here. I don't think, to your point, it kind of seems like we all can kind of sense what Paul's getting at. But Paul wants Philemon to make that last step himself, perhaps for Philemon's good. His maturity, the power of learning to reason rightly as a Christian. Philemon's not a 3-year-old, he's an 18-year-old, so to speak, spiritually. He's old enough, he's mature enough, he needs to do this for himself.
So, I think that's such an interesting place to draw the line between the spiritually mature and the spiritually immature. Because I really think this has a broad application to a lot of our spiritual struggles. I think there are a collection of disciples, and I think it's fair to say disciples who are spiritually immature, who are always looking for a black and white, right or wrong, yes and no. Okay?
They want you to tell them for them what the correct answer is.
I want you... And usually, let's borrow trouble. The issue of drinking alcohol. How many times have you been approached by a disciple who said, prove to me that I can't have a sip of beer? Because that's what everybody's doing. They're running around, opening a beer can, taking a sip, and throwing it away. Right?
Right.
The whole thing is dumb.
Yeah.
But I think that spirit, prove to me that I can't do that.
Yeah.
Is a sign of spiritual maturity.
Well, and again, the difference between asking what's wrong with something versus what's right with something, where if I'm really, the mature understand the goal is not to see how close to the world I can get without being condemned. The goal is how Christ-like can I become with the time I have in this world. Tell me what's right, tell me what's wise about what I'm doing, defined by how much closer does it bring me to God and Jesus Christ, rather than my friends drink on Friday night, how much can I participate without getting in trouble?
Right, exactly. And so that's why I love what Paul does here with Philemon in verse 9. I appeal to you. And in essence, seems to me what he says in the letter, if you kind of just put it all in a nutshell, he says, I appeal to you to do the right thing.
Yeah, and especially, again, when you go through other parts of the letter, he's reminding Philemon that he himself, in a sense, is a debtor of others' goodness to him. And then even towards the end, verse 21, confident of your obedience, I write to you, knowing you'll do even more than I say. There's the guilt trip. That's the guilt trip.
Yeah, but I think the point is that Paul knew this guy and knew I guess think about some things he had to know. Knew of his knowledge of the will of Christ. Because you can't do this unless the other person knows what the will of Christ is. And secondly, unless he doesn't know, you have to know a little bit about his heart too, right? To have confidence that, hey, when I tell him, do what Christ wants you to do, he'll know what that is, and he will be inclined that way. And so I think what separates the spiritually mature from the spiritually immature is, one, the knowledge of the will of Christ, and two, the inclination. When I know what it is, that's where I lean. I think you described earlier the guy that really wants to be out with at the bar with his friends drinking.
Yeah.
That's because he is inclined that way. He's inclined toward the world, inclined toward the crowd, not inclined toward Christ, right? And so if to be honest with you, you talked about your teenage daughter, and you know how
hypothetical teenagers. Hypothetical.
No, because I'm going to pick on you. You talked about your teenage daughter, who you would say, "I trust you will do the right thing because you know." But see, I know your teenage daughter, and the reason you would do that is because she's a great kid.
Yeah,
you know, she knows the will of Christ, and she leans that way. I'm reasonably certain that it's possible to have a kid that you would not say that to.
Oh, sure.
Because they don't lean toward Christ.
Yeah.
And they don't know what Christ's will is.
Yeah.
So it seems to me those two things are absolutely essential for what he does here. I know this guy's heart, and I know he knows what Christ wants.
Yeah.
And all I got to do, I don't have to kick him in the backside. I just got to give him a little nudge in that direction.
Yeah.
So I think one of the great takeaways from Philemon is to challenge ourselves and to ask, which kind of person am I? Am I the kind of person that says, you're going to have to prove to me, give me the passage that proves that wrong? Or am I the kind of person that says, I know Christ, I know what his will is, and that's what I really, really want to do? Am I the kind of person Paul could write to me and say, David, do the right thing?
Yeah.
Do what you know Christ would want you to do. Read through the letter and think about that, would you? We've got some time to read that. Listen, this week you can probably read through it a dozen more times, but take some time to read through it. Think about what Paul does here, how he makes that appeal, and am I kind of the person he could appeal to in that way?